Okay guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. I had this insane idea to read the Odyssey in 2 days. Now, you might be asking, why did I have this idea? And do I actually think this is possible? Okay, so let's back up. So I am obsessed with Epic the Musical, which is a musical adaptation of the Odyssey. And I first discovered it was like end of December or beginning of January, so like 5-6 months ago. It inspired me to revisit the Odyssey, and I placed a hold on a copy at my local library, and it finally came in 3 weeks ago. And May has been insane, so I didn't start reading it until yesterday. And guess what? It is due in 2 days. So we are going to read it and discuss it, and it's going to be an adventure. Now, do I think I can do this? Yes, for 2 reasons. 1, I'm a pretty fast reader, and 2, I'm motivated. I do work Saturdays, so that's going to complicate things a little bit, but tomorrow's supposed to be a light day at work, so we should be fine. Let's get started, but first off, I need a snack, because I just got off of work and I am exhausted. Let's go get something to eat. I am back with my Fanta, and in a sort of shaded spot that doesn't actually feel any cooler than the rest of the world at the moment. So here's how this is going to work. This book club is going to be a read-along because 2 reasons. 1, I'm reading the Odyssey as an ebook on the same device that I'm using to film. Slightly awkward. And then secondly, I do not have, well, obviously, since it's an ebook, I don't have a physical copy, and I don't have a personal copy to, like, take notes and whatever. So, this book club is a read-along. Most of them are just going to be, like, a discussion. Like, okay, we've read this, now let's dissect it and figure out what's going on here, what can we learn from this, what can we apply, all the good stuff. But the Odyssey is going to be an exception to the rule. I had been planning to do reading and filming between running errands to kind of break up the project because I'm feeling overwhelmed about reading the entire Odyssey in 2 days. But then my phone decided it was not going to function. So, welcome back after I've run all my errands and I am back home, and we are going to get started now. For real this time. Let's just talk for a quick second about how this is going to work. So, the Odyssey is broken up. My fancy notes. Actually, this is from an old video, but this is my notes for this video so far. The Odyssey is broken up into 24 books. I am reading the Emily Wilson edition, which was published 2017. And so, for this video, what we are going to do is I'm going to read one section, and then I'll come back and talk about it for a few minutes before going on to the next section. At the moment, I'm in the middle of the introduction. Normally, I do not read introductions, but I feel like this kind of merited an exception to the rule. So I am reading the introduction, and right now I'm about 3/4 of the way through the introduction. Emily has been talking about some really interesting stuff about like expectations of war, the ethics of hospitality, gender roles in ancient Greece, and how the gender roles that we see in the Odyssey don't necessarily line up with the gender roles we would have seen in ancient Greece. And then some of the use of, like, the Odyssey is written with a very repetitive language, like certain characters tend to be described the same way every single time. So something like in the edition of Odyssey that I read in high school, Athena was described as clear-eyed. And it was used, the description of clear-eyed was used almost every single time her name was mentioned. So it's treated more like a title than an actual description. So it would be something like, the clear-eyed Athena did such and such and such. Okay. She was talking about how this very repetitive language helps with perpetuating the oral tradition, because the Odyssey was originally a verbal story. It was an oral tradition, and only later did someone, maybe Homer, maybe a collection of people, we don't really know, sat down to put it to paper, and that is what we know as the Odyssey today. So, with all of that said, I am diving into the introduction, and I will see you guys again when I finish that section. I just finished the introduction. It was on the long side, definitely. I did take some notes. There are 3 points that I wanted to bring up. First of all, Emily Wilson pointed out that a lot of the descriptions for Odysseus start with the prefix poly, which in Greek means many. So there's this idea of Odysseus as a man of many attributes and a man of many skills and talents, and that's what enables him to make it home alive. So that's something that's very interesting to me, coming from a perspective of self-education. One of the ideas with self-education is the idea of knowing lots of things in a variety of different subjects and also picking up a lot of skills. As a famous example, you have Thomas Jefferson, he was a farmer, he was a scientist, he was a politician, he was an architect. He had a lot of things going on, and that ability to develop a plethora of skills is, shall we say, highly valued. And so that was interesting to see that echoed here in Odysseus, who is seen as a sort of like archetypal hero. The second point is this quote from Emily: "The ideal of total autonomy and permanent essence depends on the process of constant self-recreation," which is super interesting because you would think that self-recreation and permanent essence would be like mutually exclusive ideas, but apparently not. And so that's going to be something interesting to look for in the story as we continue. One last point before I dive into the actual Odyssey instead of just the introduction is that Odysseus tends to be defined by his relationships with his son, with his father, with his mentor, with Penelope, with Athena, and then with his enemies. So you have the Trojans, you have Circe and Calypso and Scylla. To a degree, you have Zeus, there's Poseidon. So Odysseus is defined in this transitory state between war and peace. He's defined by his relationships, both the ones that are calling him to peace and the ones that are calling him to war. So, interesting stuff, and let's get started with book 1. Okay, I have just finished book 1. Book 1 starts with Odysseus trapped on Calypso's island, and the gods, especially Athena and Zeus, are discussing what should happen with him. Like, are they going to let him go? Is he going to be forced to stay there? And they come to the conclusion that Odysseus is going to be released, but they're also worried about, like, we know Poseidon isn't going to appreciate this, so how are we going to deal with that? And Athena goes down to Ithaca, which is Odysseus's hometown, and she meets Telemachus, who is Odysseus's son, and is discussing the next steps with him. So she's like, okay, you need to tell the suitors off, and then go on a voyage to go look for your father. Also, I'm not going to explain a lot of the plot as I go through. I'll provide brief summaries of what's happening in the book, of what's happening in each book, but I'm going into this video with the assumption that you have read Odysseus, or you are familiar with Odysseus, or you are reading Odysseus, or you are on SparkNotes. So, have fun. Okay, so some things that really interested me in the first book is the entire story starts with the line, "Tell me about a complicated man," which I love so much. I think because it was just like really validating when I first read the Odyssey. Okay, to be completely honest, about 90% of it just went right over my head. But the parts that I did get, I was not the biggest fan of. Like, I did not appreciate Odysseus. I thought he was like an arrogant, like very self-serving jerk. and I thought Telemachus was a wimp, and Athena was just like off her rockers, and Penelope was kind of okay, I guess, but really boring. Um, but I also really wrestled with like the ethical questions of the Odyssey, such as was Odysseus justified in killing all the suitors? Or like the double standard where Penelope is expected to be loyal to her husband for 20 years when she doesn't know if he's alive or dead. Likely he died. But she's expected to be like hyper loyal to him, and then Odysseus is over here like sleeping his way through the entirety of Greece, it feels like. But he's still treated like the hero of the story, was just really hard for me to stomach. So it was very validating to have the story literally begin with, tell me about a complicated man. Because yes, Odysseus is a very complicated man. And as I've become more familiar with the story and just like reading through the introduction, I think that this time through I'm going to be able to appreciate the complexity of the story a little bit more, and hopefully I will find some things to enjoy in it. Okay. So I mentioned that we begin with Calypso, which I think that's like 12 or 13 years after he leaves home. So he spends 10 years fighting in Troy with the great like Trojan War, Trojan Horse, Helen, Paris, like that whole international fiasco, shall we call it? But then he's like voyaging for 2 or 3 years, just like getting lost, and then he spends 7 years with Calypso, and that's where the story starts, when he's about to be freed from Calypso. So that was a bit of a jolt to me because I was fully expecting it to begin with him sailing away from Troy, but that did not happen. But that's a very common storytelling technique of let's just plant the readers, plant the listeners in the middle of the story so that then they are engaged with the story and emotionally involved before you go back and do all the really boring, like, okay, so here's the basic information about the world, here's all the boring day-to-day stuff before they go on their grand adventures. It's just a very common storytelling practice. So also the wording is so beautiful. Like there's this line, Ethiopians who live between the sunset and the dawn. Between the sunset and the dawn. Oh, the wording! It's so beautiful. Also, this is much less formal language than I expected, which is making this easier to read. But honestly, I kind of miss the formal language just a little bit. Like I like biting into an old classic and be like, oh, I have to wrestle with the language. But I think that's just a me thing. I feel like a lot of readers, especially if you haven't done a lot of reading of older books, such as, like, for example, like Les Mis, Count of Monte Cristo, just like older philosophers, the Odyssey, Shakespeare, they're going to really appreciate the simpler and more modern language. But also, I think it's done really well and it doesn't detract from the story. So overall, like, just first impressions, I'm super impressed with the translation. And yeah, okay, 2 more points. Actually, 3. Okay, so like almost initially from this story, as soon as Athena touches base in Ithaca, she's put herself in an illusion of in the appearance of one of Odysseus's old friends, and she's weaving this very elaborate backstory of like, oh, I met your father at this point, and I had this adventure, and I'm here because of this, and I'm here with these people, and it's just like that. Starting the story on a note of deception is fascinating to me because there's so much of it woven through the Odyssey. And it's also presented in like morally neutral terms. I feel like that is not how we interpret deception and integrity and honesty in this modern world. So that's interesting to experience here. Another thing that was just like really emphasized to me was how much the characters are in this state of uncertainty. So I mentioned this briefly with Odysseus being stuck between the state of war and the state of peace. But Telemachus brings this up again when he was saying that like it would have been easier for his father to have just been like killed in war then for he and his mother to be stuck in this state of like, well, is he alive? Is he not alive? Is he coming back? Is he not coming back? What's going on here? So, like, all the characters, and even the gods, where they're like, yes, we're going to free Odysseus, but we're going to definitely have some conflict with Poseidon, and we're not sure how we're going to navigate. Like, all the characters are stuck in a state of uncertainty, which is super interesting, and I think a super relevant setting, because, I mean, how many of y'all know what you guys are doing with the rest of your life? Not me, by any stretch of the imagination. We are doing this by the seat of our pants. But yeah, so that's another thing I'm really looking forward to, with seeing, like, throughout the narrative. Okay, last point here, and then we are heading into book 2. We have, okay, so Athena, disguised, is sitting through dinner with Telemachus, and they're like chit-chatting, and as Athena leaves, Telemachus sees through her disguise, and he's like, oh, that was a goddess. Like, the next few lines describe him. Like, as she leaves, he becomes more godlike, and he approaches the suitors with a more mature and a more confident and a more powerful presence than he would have without Athena there. And I think that's just like a really great reminder that we become like the people we associate with. So if you want to sit at the feet of greatness, you can become great. If you are going to, like, there's this quote, there's this idea of like, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, which is very apt, very true. And so then the question is, who are you spending your time with? Who are you becoming? And who do you want to be spending your time with? Who do you want to become like? And so, yeah, excellent stuff. Let's get started into book 2. Okay, I have finished book 2. I have 3 thoughts here. In book 2, we have Telemachus beginning to act on the advice that Athena gave him. So he went to, I guess, like, the city council, the council of elders, or whatever ruling body is existing while Odysseus is away from home. I'm not entirely sure what to call it, but he goes to them and he asks for help, and essentially he is on his own. So then he is working with Athena and one of his servants to prepare for his journey. He's going to go abroad and figure out what is going on with his father. When he's talking with, we'll just call them the city council, the suitors say this really interesting thing. They say Penelope was blessed by Athena. And so you have Penelope, who is notably blessed by Athena. You have Odysseus, whose journey, both through the war and also after the war, is guided by Athena and championed by Athena. She's the one who speaks up for him in the Council of the Gods. And then you have Telemachus, who is visited by Athena and is now being guided by Athena. During the council, Zeus sends a sign of eagles swooping over the council, speeding Telemachus along his way. So what you have here is a family that is known to the gods and favored by the gods. And it's not just Odysseus, which I'd always known that Athena was a bit of a mentor to Odysseus, but I had never realized that it wasn't just Odysseus, it was the whole family who was being blessed and guided and directed by the gods. And so that was just really interesting. And perhaps I think it says something of the caliber of the family. And I would not call Odysseus and Penelope equals, but it does, like, I can see some of the romance, okay? Like, not that I would call this particularly romantic, but I can see why Penelope and Odysseus are a good match. Just with, they've both been blessed by Athena, and they also share a lot of attributes that are like wisdom and cunning and cleverness that also tend to be associated with Athena. So I can see why all of that. It's starting to make sense in my head. Okay, the puzzle pieces are coming together. Okay, second note. We have Mentor, who speaks up in the city council. I'm pretty sure that's the person Athena has been impersonating. But the actual Mentor speaks up in the city council, and he has this bit of a monologue that's essentially that the kindly king is worth nothing. And he adds that the good ruler is soon forgotten. And so there's this element here that you can also see echoed in how Telemachus is speaking both of his father's absence, that is neither life nor death. It's a Schrodinger's Odyssey. Okay, welcome to the Schrodinger's Odyssey. Have a seat. Enjoy the story. Schrodinger's Odyssey. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so Odysseus, away from home, is busy being a Schrodinger's cat. Not alive, but not dead either. And so you can see in both how Telemachus speaks of his father and his own situation with his suitors and with his mother, and then again in Mentor's speech about how a kindly ruler is soon forgotten, that there's this element of like the important thing, like it's almost like one's legacy is more important than what we today would call ethical action. And you can also see that in how the Greek underworld is set up. I do not remember the technical terms for any of these places, unfortunately. But essentially, you have hell, where the spectacularly good people go, and you have heaven, where the spectacularly good people go, and then you have the fields of asphodel, I think, where it's just like all the ordinary people go who didn't do anything to make themselves stand out. So there's this idea here of like monumental action, whether for good or for bad, is morally superior to mediocrity, which is a fascinating way to look at the world. Like just like fascinating. Yeah, okay, and then kind of building onto that. So lines 276 through 282 says, and this is Athena advising Telemachus when he's getting a little bit worried about this journey he's about to go on. Quote, "And it is rare for sons to be like fathers. Only a few are better, most are worse. But you will be no coward and no fool. You do possess your father's cunning mind, so there is hope you will to all these things. Forget about those foolish suitors' plans. They have no brains and no morality." End quote. And this is deeply interesting to me because the question here is, what is the ultimate moral virtue? I mean, you could make your case for dozens of different virtues, but the case seems to be made in the Odyssey, at least what I've read so far, is that cleverness is the superior moral virtue. Cleverness. Which leads into what I was talking about in book 1, about how deception is morally neutral. And perhaps it's like, okay, is this a clever deception? Is that what makes it morally superior? You also see this in how, okay, so in the Council of the Gods, which was one of the first scenes you had in book 1, where Athena brings up the question of, okay, Odysseus is trapped on Calypso's island, can we get him out of here? The case she makes isn't that, like, oh, he's such a good man, he's so kind, he's so virtuous, he's so this, he's so that. He is a very clever person, and he's my favorite. So let's get him out of here. And it's not even he's a clever person and he's my favorite, it's he's a clever person, and so he is my favorite, which is very interesting. Like, there's this idea being presented that cleverness is the chief moral virtue, which is a very different mindset, which I think is why it fascinates me so much. Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree that that is the chief moral virtue. I think cleverness is very useful, but I think also cleverness, like many other things, is just a tool. So it's to what purpose are you doing this? Are you staying within the bounds of ethical action, etc., so on and so forth. With that thought, we shall continue on to book 3. Okay, I just finished book 3, and okay, so in book 3, my notes, my beautiful notes. In book 3, we have Telemachus going and visiting King Nestor with Athena, and he's going around like looking for information about the whereabouts of his father. You know, being like, is he alive? Is he dead? Where is he? Where was he last seen? What information do you have? Do you know anything, please? And Nestor tells him about his time in the Trojan War and the events directly after it. And in his tale, the gods are depicted as cruel and unwieldy and as like fairly petty people. And so it's interesting to me that, like, especially Athena, who Telemachus knows he's sitting right next to. And it's interesting to me that Telemachus doesn't even waver. He's like, okay, you had your experience with the gods. I'm having my experience with the gods. And it makes me wonder if Telemachus is aware of how his family has been, like, blessed by Athena. Not that, like, as a family they were explicitly blessed by Athena, but, you know, Penelope was blessed by Athena. Odysseus was guided and mentored by Athena, and now Telemachus himself is being mentored and guided by Athena. And so, yeah, it's just very interesting of how two people can have such vastly different experiences with the same thing, even with the same ideas. Like, you give two people the same article about the election, and they're going to come away with vastly different opinions and feelings and experiences. Yeah, because we all view the world through such a unique lens. Our own personal beliefs and the experiences that went into those beliefs. Yeah, and then like we come into the world with such different expectations of how things work and how things should work based on like our upbringing and the expectations we were surrounded with growing up. So yeah, it's just fascinating to me how two people can approach the same thing and come away with such vastly different experiences and impressions about it. So that stuck out with me. At the end of Nestor's story there, he tells Telemachus, "Be brave so you will be remembered," which is an interesting line, and it points back to everything I was saying about book 2 with having the ultimate moral virtue and then how the Greek underworld is structured. So it's just interesting of like that being reiterated once again. And then, so Nestor told his story, and there's some back and forth between him and Telemachus. Okay, Nestor says that your father was blessed by Athena. If you have the same blessing that he had, then you will see success in your journey and in your quest. And Telemachus is like, oh, I don't know about that. That might be true, but I feel like this isn't going to end very well. I don't have a lot of hope about this. Well, Athena speaks up, still in disguise, and she's like, whoa. The gods have a lot of influence, and if you have them on your side, it's going to be very beneficial. But then she admits, even gods cannot protect the people they love when fate and cruel death catch up with them. Something I've been noticing through this is the idea, like time and time again, of like the gods are players in the universe. Like they aren't running the show, they aren't in charge of the show, they weren't here before the show, there are as much of players on the world stage as the humans are, just albeit slightly less mortal and arguably dumber. And that's such an interesting concept because that is not all how Christianity views the gods. There's in the beginning there was nothing, and then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God said, and God looked upon it and said it was good, something like that. Very rough paraphrasing, but there's this idea of there's a permanence and an outsideness to them. We exist in this system, but they are on the other side of it, and they can't control it. But it's quite different with the Greek gods. Something else I noticed is that, so I was obsessed with mythology when I was younger, especially Greek mythology, but also as I was getting into my teenage years, 12, 13, 14, with Norse mythology. There's a contrast there that has always really stood out to me. There's a heroism to the Greeks, and there's a hope to the Greeks, and there's an element of laughing in the face of danger because you know that you're invincible to it. Heracles finds out that his friend's wife died, and so he goes into the underworld and brings her back. That is, there's just this optimism, and from the part of both the gods and the heroes, a level of we have power, not even we have power, but it's this idea of every situation is beneath us. And then you go into Norse mythology, and it's yeah, we're all doomed. The world is going to end, and the best you can do is fight honorably and die in battle so that you can go fight alongside the gods in the final battle that is going to end in a loss for the gods. And that, it's just such a different perspective of there's a despair, but we're going to fight through the despair, and to a degree it's that despair and that it's that finality of loss that gives meaning to everything we do up to that moment. And of course there's this whole big discussion of what was Norse mythology like before you had the Christian missionaries coming in and Christianizing everything. And there's this whole debate of, was that a concept that existed pre-Christianity, or is that a Christian bastardization of Norse mythology? That's a whole huge debate. Okay, I don't know the answers to it, but that is what I noticed from Norse mythology. And it's a very different feeling from Greek mythology, which is very much there's this expectation of we are going to be the victors. Heracles not storms, but he marches into the underworld and he's give my friend's wife back and we won't have any problems here, and he gets the lady back. I can't remember her name. And then not even death is going to stop these Greek heroes. They are even death has to bow to the Greek heroes and the Greek gods. And that is not true in Norse mythology. And so Greek mythology is tinged with this hopefulness and this expectation of victory. And then Norse mythology is very somber. It's about sacrifice and inevitability, and it's a very, very different experience. But this line here from Athena, even gods cannot protect the people they love when fate and cruel death catch up with them. That line caught me off guard because that's not a line that I would associate with Greek mythology. Okay, anyways, tangent. You see in this conversation between Nestor and Telemachus and Athena that Telemachus is going through this battle of despair and hope. That's echoing back to the state of uncertainty that everyone in the story is in. And it's this constant binary, not necessarily stated, but this constant assumed binary and uncertainty that every single character is in. That's just something I wanted to reiterate, because I feel like one of the big things that complicated stories about complicated people can help us as readers and me as a reader with is understanding how do we navigate that? How do we navigate that uncertainty? How do we navigate those moral dilemmas? So that's something I am paying very close attention to from this read through with Odyssey. So I'm sure you will see that brought up time and time again. Well, on that note, let us continue to book 4. I have a handful of notes here. So first of all, Telemachus in book 4, he goes with the son of Nestor to visit Menelaus, who was another one of his father's comrades who made it home safely from war. Telemachus and Menelaus are talking, and Menelaus shares his story again of his time in the Trojan War, the events that happened directly after it, how he survived, how he came home. He has some very, good information for Telemachus. He says that an old sea god saw Odysseus weeping on Calypso's island, which is information in that now we know Odysseus isn't dead, but Telemachus is still in this state of uncertainty because, okay, so he's alive, but can he get off Calypso's island? Generally speaking, that's kind of a life sentence there. So again, he's still in that state of uncertainty, but he's moving ahead, and he's been moving ahead this entire story so far. Another thing, as Telemachus and his friend are arriving at Menelaus' house, Menelaus' slaves are like, should we take them in or should we send them over to the next village? And Menelaus is like, guys, we survived, we came back alive because people were hospitable to us. And so therefore, we are morally required to extend that same hospitality to others. In the introduction, one of the things Emily was talking about is this idea of hospitality in Greek society, where their hotels and inns, etc., weren't as much of a thing back then, so travelers would rely on the mercy and the hospitality of people that they passed by. And there was hospitality was a heavily ritualized thing in that there were expectations for the host, there were expectations for the guest. There was a level of courtesy that was required from both ends. It was expected the hospitality was going to be repaid. It was ritualized to a degree because that's what enabled survival and travel. Odysseus survives because of hospitality and because he knows how to navigate those rituals with grace. And you can see that again with Telemachus going around visiting all of his dad's former friends and participating in this ritual of hospitality. But then, in contrast, you see the suitors, where they've stayed in Penelope's mansion for years without any regard for hospitality or the rituals and courtesies that are associated with it. And that's morally bad and very clearly painted as morally bad, whereas is clearly painted as a moral virtue to be able to extend hospitality, but also to receive hospitality with grace. So that's another very interesting moral difference between the Odyssey and our current world that was driven by necessity. And it's very interesting to see how much of socially acceptable behavior is driven by necessity, such as with this expectation and ritual of hospitality. As just another really funny example, not funny, but this amusing example from more recent history of the gentleman pulling out the chair for the lady to sit down. We look at that and it was like, oh, that's just respectful or whatever. Okay, back when women wore hoop skirts and a lot of petticoats, that was to keep the chair from falling over. Okay, so we have this we have this manner, we have this tradition within society that is still in place to a degree, but we no longer have the necessity that gave birth to it. And so as we've lost that necessity, we've also, to a degree, have lost the ritual. Like, it's no longer traditional, like it's still polite, but it's no longer expected that a gentleman is going to pull out the chair for the lady to sit down. And there are other norms that have risen up, not in its place, but because of other necessities that have arisen as fashion and culture and technology, etc., 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 have advanced. So it's just interesting to see how this is a case of social ethics that was birthed from a necessity, and at the time of the Odyssey, it's still very much required by necessity. But yeah, little things like that, and just like culture or just like people's expectations of proper behavior just fascinate me. So I had to point that one out. Also in book 4, we are brought back to Ithaca, where we see the suitors plotting. They've realized that Telemachus is gone, and they're like, hey, when he comes back, let's kill him. Genius plan. And one of the servants tells Penelope, and that's how she finds out that her son left, and also that the suitors are planning to kill him. And then she's horribly sad, and Athena sends her a dream telling her everything's going to be okay. And she wakes up happy. Maybe not happy, but like contented. Yeah. So, moral of the story, moral of book 4, if the kindness we receive is the kindness we give. Or maybe, well, the suitors did receive kindness, but then you can see them trespassing that. Not just trespassing the kindness, but trespassing like the manners and the rituals and the courtesies around hospitality. So maybe it's more like the noble in heart will repay the kindness that they receive. Something to that effect. In book 6, we have Athena visit Zeus again and beg once more for Odysseus to be released from Calypso's island. And Zeus says something really interesting, that the whole situation with Telemachus going and visiting all these different people and the suitors plotting to kill his life was all set up by Athena to force the gods to respond and to release Odysseus. And so that was making me wonder if perhaps Athena, in order to goad the gods into acting, created this trespassing of hospitality. Okay, so we've seen like humans are doing all these stupid things. The gods are very petty. Generally speaking, there's an idea of like the gods will just let you do your thing unless if you sacrifice very handsomely to them, in which case they will help you. But the exception to that rule seems possibly to be the trespassing of hospitality, which is a very interesting exception. So you see that the gods respect the cleverness, and they'll act for that. Like the moral code that they'll defend is this concept of hospitality, which is very interesting, especially for Zeus as the god of justice and balance. Because in hospitality, in this idea of hospitality, there's this idea of like the give and the take, both of the host and the guest within the actual encounter, but then also this idea of like hospitality needs to be repaid. Not just repaid to that specific person who gave you hospitality, although that certainly seems true from my understanding of hospitality, but also paid forward. As you see with Menelaus, we survived because of hospitality, and now we need to extend it. Now we are required to extend it. So that was interesting there. So Zeus says, alright, kudos Athena, we will release Odysseus. And so he sends Hermes to Calypso's island, and Hermes essentially negotiates, threatens, whatever word you want to use. Hermes ensures that Odysseus is released. Now, side note, Hermes is one of my favorite characters in Epic the Musical. He's just So well written, and the iconic laugh, it's just amazing. So I definitely had some of Hermes' songs going through my head while reading this part, but I digress. This is a book club of Odysseus. This is a book club of the Odyssey, not Epic the Musical, although we might have to circle back and do that. So Calypso is letting Odysseus go, and Odysseus first has to build this raft. It takes him 4 days, maybe like 4.5. He leaves on the 5th day. And Calypso is trying to convince Odysseus not to leave. And she's like, if you leave, you're going to suffer, you'll grow old, you're going to die, your wife isn't as pretty as me, etc. And Odysseus says, if some god strikes me on the wine-dark sea, I will endure. By now I am used to suffering. I've gone through so much at sea and in the war. Let this come too. So first of all, is this idea of being willing to sacrifice to return home. But also he's very matter-of-fact about like what his situation is. It's like, yes, there's going to be danger. Yes, there will be risk. Yes, I will die, whether that's crossing the sea or just in old age. And he's like, yes, there are risks, but I'm going to take this endeavor anyways. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action in spite of fear. And I just really like that Odysseus is like, yep, this might go really poorly, but I am choosing to do this anyways. And it is my choice to make. A few lines down, like 24 lines down, it says, as wide as when a man who knows his trade marks out the curving hole to fit a ship, so wide Odysseus marked out his raft. And this harkens back to the idea that I mentioned while discussing the introduction about how like Odysseus is a man of many skills and many talents and many attributes. And you can see like he's building this raft with the skill of one who knows what he's doing. Next up in the story, Poseidon realizes that Odysseus has been released and he is not happy. So he tries to drown Odysseus. While in the middle of this horrible storm, Odysseus is wishing for death when Calypso is trying to warn him from taking this journey. She calls the sea between her island and Ithaca a sea of suffering. And I wonder if perhaps another way to look at it would be a sea of uncertainties. Again, like yes, Odysseus has been released, but there isn't a certainty yet about his fate of like, is he going to survive? Is he going to die? He's stuck again in this transitory space between not just like war and peace, but also life and death. And I think like an existence without change, which seems to be a pretty fair description of Calypso's island, or an existence where there is frailty and mortality, which is the world that he's returning to. So again, he's stuck in this transitory space, which that transitory space seems to be the making or the breaking of heroes and villains, which is very interesting because in those places you're dealing with the most uncertainties, the most complexities, but also with the most possibilities. I don't know that it creates one's character, but it certainly reveals one's character. Okay, it is 8:57. I just spent 2 hours scrolling, which I am really, really kicking myself about. So I need to go start book 6. If I can finish book 10 by, let's say, 10:30 p.m. Okay, so that gives me an hour and a half to do this. I will go to Walmart and get ice cream. Okay, let's get started. So Odysseus washes up on the shores of Phaeacia, where he is discovered by Nausicaa and her serving girls. Nausicaa decided to go do some laundry because the great goddess Athena told her it was time to do some laundry. When Athena visits this girl in a vision, she takes on the disguise of one of Nausicaa's dearest friends. When Odysseus meets Nausicaa, he like his go-to, like he takes a strategy of flattery and kind of misrepresenting some things. And this is the first time, I believe, in the Odyssey that we see Odysseus's charm and persuasiveness and his charisma and his skills with words. Everything we've seen so far has been, he's been mourning the people he lost. He's been lamenting the time away from his wife and son. He's been wanting to go home. He built a raft. But this is the first time we see his verbal talents, and they are not used amiss, okay? Nausicaa is the princess of this place. I can't remember how to pronounce it anymore. I literally listened to how to pronounce it like 7 times already. Okay, Nausicaa is princess of this place that Odysseus washed up on, so he's on his way to beseech her parents, the king and queen, for aid to get home. Okay, as Odysseus and Nausicaa are talking, Odysseus is like, "Oh, I am a poor and lonely traveler I've had a miserable go of it, essentially." And Nausicaa says, lines 187 through 193, "You seem a brave and clever man. You know that Zeus apportions happiness to people, to good and bad, each one as he decides. Your troubles come from him, and you must bear them. But since you have arrived here in our land, you will not lack for clothes or anything a person needs in time of desperation." And so again, it's this heightening of this whole idea of hospitality, of maybe the gods do not favor you, but we are still going to treat you with compassion and respect. We are still going to treat you with the compassion and the respect that the rituals of hospitality demand. And so it's just like, once again, this reiteration and I think this expansion of this idea of hospitality. As he is walking through the city, he finds this altar of Athena and he pleads with her for help and for continuing guidance as he makes his way home. And Athena waits. She does not respond, which is curious because she seems quite willing to be intimately involved in the lives of those she favors. But she's holding back here. The text makes this point of Athena is waiting because she respects the will of her uncle. Her uncle being Poseidon, who hates Odysseus, does not want to see him get home, has been trying to kill him for most of book 5. Yeah, but Athena is waiting out of respect for his wishes. And that's one way to put it. But I think another way you could frame it is that she's trying to find this balance between helping Odysseus, but also Poseidon was sort of promised that he wasn't going to make it home. So it's this balance that the Council of Gods was discussing earlier of yes, but also. And there's this negotiation that not just humanity has to make between the different gods, but that the gods themselves have to make between their different wills. And so, yeah, interesting stuff. Life is complex, full of complex situations and complex people, and that's why you should get an education. It's not just about getting the education, it's about knowing how to apply it to help you navigate those situations with tact and with a functional moral compass and with the ability to innovate. Because a lot of times I've been talking about the binaries that the characters keep finding themselves in, of life and death, of Calypso's island and of Ithaca, of hope and despair, of childhood and manhood. But so often, when it looks like there are only this binary of choices, there are so many other choices that you get to make. Like I was saying earlier, in a sea of uncertainties, yes, everything is uncertain, but at the same time, the possibilities are limitless. So I think that having the knowledge and to use an Odyssey, okay, I should stop inventing English, to use a word that Odysseus and Athena would approve of cleverness, to be able to see not just the options that you're presented with, but all the possibilities that are around you, because there's always so many more than what you're aware of or what you're told about. So, yes, shameless plug for self-education. Let's go. Okay, let's move on to book 7. Okay, so I actually don't have a lot of notes here, But something that did stand out to me was that at the end of chapter 6, we have Odysseus praying to Athena for help, and Athena waits. And then, beginning of chapter 7, we have Athena appear as a guide disguised, and Odysseus does not recognize her at first. But again, it's this element of disguise, and it's a very, I feel like it's a very good setup for this book, which essentially follows Odysseus trying to navigate relations with Nausicaa's family. Okay, so Athena, as she's guiding him, she's giving him some advice. She says, "The brave succeed in all adventures," which I love that. Something I've been thinking about more and more as I've been digging through the Odyssey is this idea of the brave succeed. Be brave so you will be remembered. That was said to Telemachus, I think that by Nestor. This idea of like be brave to succeed or be brave to be remembered has been repeated over and over and over again. And I've been thinking about this more with the whole idea of the sea of suffering versus the sea of uncertainties and the possibilities and the potentials that so often we only see two of. And I think one of the keys to being able to see that plethora of potential is bravery. Because it's not just about, like, it's so easy to just see the opportunities that you're given and that are obvious, but it takes bravery, it takes courage to be able to see beyond that, because many times the choices that aren't obvious, frequently there's like you don't know what's going to come of them. They aren't and to quote Robert Frost, it's the path less traveled. And so there is an element of bravery, the willingness to put aside fear and to act in spite of that fear, that opens up all these doors and these opportunities and these potentials that otherwise we would miss. Something else I really loved when Athena is guiding him to the palace. She's like, okay, so be brave, and also here's a family tree of the people you are about to go negotiate with. So she's like, here's some background, some useful information, things you might want to know. Be tactful about this. Let me give you the briefing. And I just love it. I think it also makes Odysseus seem a little bit more human, of like, there's information here that he doesn't know going into it, and that, like, yeah, it just humanizes him because it feels less omniscient and less omnipotent, and it was kind of funny to read, so I appreciated that. Yeah, and then the rest of the scene is essentially him just negotiating relationships with Nausicaa's family, which is really interesting. At first, like, maybe he's cursed, maybe he's a god, do you want to marry my daughter? It felt like a whole roller coaster of emotions that his hosts were experiencing. And Odysseus is navigating all of these with grace and tact. Odysseus is a very political man. And what I mean by that is not like, oh, he's a Democrat, oh, he's a Republican, oh, you're going to argue with your family over Thanksgiving dinner about politics. No, by a political man, I mean like someone who, he's a statesman, he's able to negotiate. There's this level of like awareness of the situation that he's walking into and the powers that be and the way to like manipulate those powers to get what he wants. He's very, I guess you could call it like street smarts. Odysseus is a very political man, and you definitely get to see a lot more of it than you got to see in book 6, and also to appreciate it a lot more. Yeah, the feeling of the scene was a little bit like walking into your manager and asking for a raise. Like, yes, Odysseus has been lost from home for 18 years. Yes, he's in a foreign king's court. But the tone and the setting of the scene are so familiar. It's like, well, yeah, I know that. I've experienced that. Like, yeah, I've gone in to negotiate with people. of like, okay, I need some help here, and I need to be tactful about this, and also avoid marrying your daughter if at all possible. Okay, not that one specifically, but yeah, it's very interesting of like, here's this highbrow scene, and yet it is so relatable and so human. And I think part of that might come down to the word choice of Emily Wilson. Like I mentioned earlier, she uses very, like, not overly modern language, but it's definitely modern language. I dug through my books and I found my original copy of the Odyssey. This is what I read in, it was 11th or 10th grade. Complete and unabridged, but it's like a pocket edition. Like, it's quite small, okay? Still has the thrift book sticker on it. Okay, it's the T.E. Lawrence translation. It's not like a King James Bible, but it is much older English. Like, in a way, I love the older sounding English. But at the same time, the more modern language is much more approachable, so I can appreciate that too. Yeah, okay, that was my final thoughts on book 7. Let's get on to book 8. This one felt a little bit all over the place, and I struggled to follow some of this story. But essentially what happens is the bards are singing a song about the Trojan War, and Odysseus starts crying, and then the city that he's staying in has, I guess, like a mini Olympics. Is it like a sporting day? And some of the people there are tormenting Odysseus, and they're like, oh, you wouldn't know anything about sports, you're not cultured enough. Then Odysseus snaps, and then he outdoes them all, and it's epic. And then later, they're at dinner again, and the bard is singing again about the Trojan War, and Odysseus is crying again. And this scene feels a little bit like the second book in a trilogy, where it's just there because you need a little bit of a bridge between book 1 and book 3, but the plot is sagging. So, like, I know, I can see how this is important for story development. Odysseus's physical prowess is laying the groundwork for when he kills all the suitors. Spoiler alert, kills all the suitors. His reactions to the songs about the Trojan War is set up for him to, if I understand correctly, he reveals his identity, and then he tells his full story, which is where we hear about the Cyclops and Circe and his trip to the underworld, etc. Yeah, so, like, I understand why this book is important, but also I feel like it could have used some development. Oh well, Homer is long dead. My complaints won't do him any good. Yeah, okay, but there was this one line. The gods devised and measured out this devastation, talking about the Trojan War. The gods devised and measured out this devastation to make a song for those in times to come. And point blank, I struggle with that line. But also, these are not the gods I believe in, so I can sit in that discomfort. I want to share an example of the more archaic, of the more formal English compared to, okay, so just read it again to refresh your mind. The gods devised and measured out this devastation to make a song for those in times to come. In the E.T. Lawrence translation, copyright 2004, published 2004, the line is, that was wrought by the gods who measured their life's thread for those men, that their fate might become a poem sung to generations yet to be. So just an example of like some more formal wording versus the very almost like a familiar tone to the Emily Wilson translation. This did remind me of that one part in Lord of the Rings where Sam is like, oh my goodness, this is going to be the coolest story ever. And someone's going to be like, oh, tell the story again about Nine-Fingered Frodo. And Frodo was like, and about I can't remember the adjective he uses for Sam. Stalwart, maybe? Something like that. It's just like this awareness of like we are the story. And with that, like the stories that came before, how do I phrase this? It's like this idea that the stories were real at some point. Like, it's not just some wild fantasy. It's like, oh, my ancestors did this. Or like, oh, my grandpa did this. Oh, my mom did this. It's like a tangible connection to the stories of, like, they were just people, complex people, in complex situations, making complex choices, and therefore, so can I. On that note, let us move on to book 9 and hopefully get into some more meat, okay? I am looking forward to the whole backstory, okay? Okay, so first of all, the whole thing with the Cyclops is like so iconic, okay? Like, who hurt you? No man. Yeah, excellent stuff. But I love Circe, okay? I cannot begin to explain how much I love her. Entirely because of Epic the Musical. So we will see if the OG Circe is as fan-worthy as the Epic the Musical version. And yeah, let's dive back into the story. Okay guys, we finished book 9. So, Odysseus reveals himself to the court. And he's like, yep, okay, I am Odysseus, who you've been singing about. And here is my story. And he starts telling his story. So, he leaves Troy. He sacks some people. He sails around for days. Everyone's starving. They stop on an island to get food. It's the lotus eaters. If you eat the lotus, you forget your identity, your goals, your desires. Everything is just about, oh, the next lotus. Cell phones. I feel like that is an excellent analogy for a lot of things. But let's refrain from making them, shall we? For the moment, at least. And then, of course, the iconic story. The iconic story with the Cyclops. Let me see. Okay, so through this entire story that Odysseus is telling in book 9, and which he will continue to tell in book 10, and I'm not sure how many books. But he is telling this story from first person point of view. Some of his word choices are very interesting. Like, he's very careful to portray himself as this wonderful person, this like flawed person, but a justified person. Like, yes, I sacked those people, but that's kind of what you do when you're at war. Yes, I blinded the Cyclops, but that's how we were going to make it out alive. And another thing is, I think he believes it all, which you could have the whole ethical debate, does the end justify the means, etc., etc., etc. The point that is interesting to me here is that, one, we are seeing this through Odysseus's eyes, whereas most of the story, we've been seeing it through a sort of like omniscient third-person narrator. For those of you who don't know, first person is like, I did this, I did that, I went there. Second person is, you did this, you did that, you went there. And third person is, she did that, he did that, they went there, etc. And omniscient, all-knowing. Okay, so there we have this, like, theoretically, up until this point, the entire story is reliable. But now with Odysseus, we have the introduction of an unreliable narrator. So can we trust anything he's saying? That is an excellent question. So it's interesting because here we are put into the same place that a lot of the characters have been throughout the story, where, say, Athena is showing up in disguise, she's spinning her story, sending her visions. Odysseus is showing up, he's flattering, he's manipulating, he's, playing, he's gaming the system, whatever. He's gaming the system, playing the court, however you want to phrase it. But this is the first time where it's like, okay, so are we being played? Because every time up until this, it's like, oh yes, we are watching Odysseus game them in play. We know the truth, but they don't. Those poor suckers. And I was like, well, okay, but now we're on the receiving end of that. So what's the truth? What's being exaggerated? What's being presented in one way or another, where maybe it's not entirely true, but it's not necessarily false. So that is, I personally love unreliable narrators. I think they're so much fun to, one, understand how like someone sees themselves and how they want other people to see them, but also it's a fun experience of like, okay, so it's like we're playing detective. Okay, so what's going on here? What can I piece together from this? What do I want to trust? What do I want to distrust? Based on what I know of this character, where do I think he's going to be kind of fudging some things? Fun stuff. Through this entire thing, through this entire story, Odysseus is very careful to emphasize again and again strategy. I was strategic. I was a trickster. We strategized this. We hatched a plan. Whatever. We hatched a plan. And again, it's his strategy. It's his cleverness. It's all these attributes that Athena, his mentor, has been guiding him through and mentoring him in. And you can see that also to a smaller degree through her relationship with Penelope and again with Telemachus. A quote here from when he is hiding with the sheep and they're leaving the Cyclops cave. Last of all, the big ram went outside, heavy with wool and me, the clever trickster. And he's like, that's how he sees himself, the clever trickster. That's his identity. Like, that's not even just like, that's how he sees himself, but that's how he wants the world to see him. And I think that's reiterated again in how he treats the Cyclops after they're on the boat. And he's taunting the Cyclops, and the Cyclops is throwing stones at the ship. There's a little bit of back and forth, and then he identifies himself. He's like, I'm Odysseus. I am the king of Ithaca. Tremble before me. I caused your problem, so yeah, fear me. He's creating the reputation he wants to have. I feel like it's fairly intentional. First of all, he wants to be seen as a clever trickster, and he also wants clever trickster to be identified with Odysseus. It's not enough that just like, oh, there was some like crazy cool trickster who came in here and outsmarted the Cyclops. No, it's Odysseus, the crazy trickster, came in here and outsmarted the Cyclops. And that's a little bit of an undoing for him, that ego and, I guess, arrogance, willing to gamble, shall we say. Or maybe he's prioritizing his desire for glory over his desire to get home safely. Or perhaps he thinks he can have his cake and eat it too. I'm not entirely sure what is going through his mind there. It's an interesting concept of, like, how do you see yourself? How do you want others to see yourself? So I did ballroom dance very briefly in high school. And one of the things my dance teacher always talked about, I think it was like every single class she brought it up, is instead of doing the action to try to create the identity and then the action will follow. So instead of being like, oh, I need to eat healthy so I can be a dancer, it's like, I'm a dancer and therefore I'm going to do the things that dancers do, such as like eating healthy, exercising regularly, putting in the work to learn the routines, staying fit, continually learning and improving my technical skills, etc. And so Odysseus has this reputation, he has this identity, and then the actions follow, instead of the actions creating the identity. I think this is mostly subconscious, but it can be a very powerful tool to use if you bring it to consciousness. Be like, okay, I am such and such, therefore I am going to do this and that and whatever else is on your list of things that you need to do, okay? One last thing, this is going back to the beginning of book 9, when Odysseus has introduced himself and he's like, okay, you want to hear my story? I'm going to give you my story. He says, where shall I start? Where can I end? Which, I mean, if you're telling a long story, it seems very natural. But this stuck out to me because there's this idea of like that state of uncertainty or that transitory state of there isn't exactly a clear beginning of the story, and there isn't exactly a clear end to the Odyssey either. Like, there isn't a neat resolution. If Homer was getting published nowadays, his editor would be all over him like, bro, tie up those loose ends. Are these loose strings around here? We don't do that. Fix it. Send it back to the draft. But I think also with that is that Odysseus is aware that he's in this transitory state. And knowledge is power, because if you know what your realistic situation is, if you can just like strip away the facades and be like, okay, well, here's where I am, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, here's what's going on, here are my problems, here's the potentials, the opportunities, then you can be like, okay, so what is my next step? Where am I going from here? What am I going to do next? And that is when you start asking those questions with that mindset, that is a powerful place to be. Welcome back to day 2 of reading the Odyssey. It is around 4:45, and I want to finish the Odyssey by midnight. We will see how that goes. Yesterday, I read the introduction and the first 9 books of the Odyssey. There are 24 books in total, which means I have a ways to go. So we will see how insane this endeavor actually is. Last night, I promised myself that I could get ice cream if I finished by 10:30. I did not make that goal. I finished book 9 by 10:30, and then I decided that was good enough, and I went and I got ice cream. So, with that very important backstory in mind, let's dig into book 10, and I will see you guys on the other side. I have finished book 10. Plot points in this one. After they flee the Cyclops, they find the island in the sky that is the home of Aeolus, the wind god, and he gives them a wind bag that will help them on their journey home, but it's supposed to remain closed. And Odysseus' men get jealous and they're like, oh, Odysseus got a gift from Aeolus, so they open the bag to see what it is, and then they're blown far, far off course to the land of the giants, and the giants kill almost the entire fleet. Only one ship survives, Odysseus' ship, which then finds its way to Circe, who is my favorite person in Epic the Musical. So I was super excited for this part, and then disappointed by what I read here. Circe is a goddess, and I think like she could probably best be described as an enchantress. She turns Odysseus' men into pigs. Then Odysseus comes to try to save them, and on his way he runs into Hermes, who is the god of messengers, travelers, thievery, trickery, a whole handful of other things. And he's like, okay, so Odysseus, here is how you're going to defeat Circe, and how you're going to get help from Circe to continue your journey. Odysseus goes to Circe's house and he's like, okay, we have a slight issue here. And he tries to drug him to turn him into a pig. Okay, but Hermes gave him a magical root called moly that makes him impervious to Circe's spells. So Circe does not turn him into a pig, and then Odysseus and Circe sleep together, because obviously that is the next right thing to do. So because of that, Odysseus gains Circe's favor. His men are turned back into humans, and they stay with Circe for a year before they decide to continue their quest. The next step on their quest is the underworld, where they are going to go petition Hades and Persephone and speak to the dead prophet. Okay, so those are all the plot points. Did I learn anything from this? I think I was too busy being disappointed about Circe to be very intellectual about this part of the story. So the Circe in Epic the Musical, she's very dramatic, and she's very charismatic too. And her songs are so beautiful, and just like the little like jokes and the references in them are amazing. And the Circe in the book, she's much more blunt and a lot more forthright. which, I mean, like, as a character, I can appreciate that, okay? It's an excellent character in the Odyssey. It just isn't the Circe of the Epic the Musical that I was looking forward to reading about. But I was a little bit disappointed about that one. Anyways, and so we continue. Okay, I will see you guys with chapter 11. Odysseus and what is left of his crew is in Hades and the underworld. And they are calling on the dead to find the prophet to figure out what they need to do to get home. So, the first person that they see is Elpenor, who was one of Odysseus' men who was drunk and fell off a roof and died when they were leaving Circe's house. So, fun place to start. And Elpenor is like, hello, what about the burial rites? Like, you don't just abandon a body there before it's even cold. And Odysseus is like, oh, oops, I'm so sorry, we will fix that. Yeah, so Elpenor, do not go on and leave me there unburied. Which I think harkens back to what I was discussing earlier about hospitality and like all the rituals and the courtesies around it. And you see that it's not just hospitality among the living, it's also hospitality between the living and the dead. One of the things in Greek mythology, which I think is a pretty common theme through a lot of mythologies, is the idea that the dead need certain items to enter the underworld and find their eternal, well, hopefully rest if they live decently. In Greek mythology, where in order to pass into the underworld by crossing the river Styx, you needed a coin to pay the ferryman so that you could get across. Okay, so these burial rites did not happen with Elpenor. He's like, okay, do not come on and leave me there unburied, because that hospitality, that ritual, that courtesy is what enables him to continue his journey, metaphorically speaking. Okay, so then we have Odysseus talking with a lot of other ghosts, notable women from Greek history sent by Persephone, old soldier friends from the Trojan War, including Agamemnon, who we will circle back to in a second, old Greek heroes such as Heracles, and also the prophet. Okay, so the prophet greets him, King under Zeus, Odysseus, adept survivor. And like, that's his title, that's the greeting. Which harkens back to this whole idea of how does Odysseus see himself? We saw in book 9 that he sees himself as a clever trickster. And that's, again, reiterated here, adept survivor. The prophet has some excellent advice, like, here's some of the problems you're going to run into, here's the choices that you could take that will destroy you, here's the choices you could take that will save you. And then he has this warning. Odysseus, you think of going home as honey sweet, but the gods will make it bitter. Which is a very foreboding line for someone who has been gone from home for so long, who has a life back home, he has a wife, he has a son, he has an estate, he has his parents. Well, okay, if he finds out in this scene that his mom died out of grief of him not coming home for years after the war, so that is tragic. His mom died. I think just as an archetypal level, there's never a going back. You see that with the hero's journey of the hero gets called into this foreign world, they have mentoring, they go through trials, they are at the bottom of despair, they get the goddess's gift, they succeed, they get the spoils of war, and then they return home, and yet, like, they're home, but it's different, because they're different. It's like in Lord of the Rings, where Frodo was like, yes, we saved the Shire, but it will never be saved for me. It's this acknowledgement of, like, yes, we're back, yes, we've returned, yes, we've gone full circle, But everything that happened to us in that journey, and everything we did in that journey, and the choices we made in the journey, and the experiences we had in that journey have changed us so fundamentally that there is no going back to, there's no going back to the way that things were before all of this started. And that is very much a bittersweet thing of yeah, there's no going back, but at the same time, we've progressed, we've learned more, we've hopefully become more capable. Hopefully we've made some progress over this, but at the same time, there's no going back. The gods will make it bitter. One last thing, which I just thought was so funny. Okay, so all of this from the Cyclops to Aeolus to Circe to now the underworld, all of this is Odysseus telling the story to Nausicaa's family. And Nausicaa's dad is Odysseus, the earth sustains all different kinds of people. Many are cheats and thieves who fashion lies out of thin air. But when I look at you, I know you are not in that category. Which just strikes me as so funny. Because Odysseus has literally been, he's been lying, he's been tricking, he's been stealing, he's been thieving, he's been raiding, he's been sacking. This is not exactly a morally upright man. But he presents himself as a morally upright man. Let's talk Book 12. So, Odysseus and his crew returns from Hades to the land of the living, and they buried Elpenor. Circe is oh my gosh, you guys are still alive! And the quote is kind of funny, so I wrote it down. This is amazing. You all went alive to Hades. You will be twice dead, where other people only died one time. So then, his crew is feasting, and Odysseus and Circe go aside to talk. And Circe warns him about the sirens, Scylla, and Helios, which will be his next big obstacles. And she specifically tells him, you can't fight Scylla. All you can do is flee from her as fast as you can. And Odysseus is but we're really strong. We can do her. We can do this. We can take her down. And Circe says, your mind is still obsessed with deeds of war. Which harkens back to a concept from yesterday of Odysseus being stuck between a state of war and a state of peace. And you can see him wrestling with that now. When is the time to fight? When is the time to flee? When is the time to be wary? When is the time to be wary? When is the time to relax? And that's something very complex to navigate, especially because he's a war veteran. He essentially has PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you can see him still wrestling with the side effects of everything with the Trojan War and all the aftermath of it. So that was interesting to see there. Helios plays a pretty major plot point here. Helios is the Greek sun god, and he has these sacred cattle, 7 herds of 50 head. And Circe says, if you can remember home and leave the cows unharmed, you will at last arrive in Ithaca. And there's something about these cows that will erase your memory to a degree. I think it works kind of like the lotus. I'm not entirely sure. If you can remember what your end goal is and not transgress essentially this hospitality principle, because they are going to Helios' island. Are they going to rob him, or are they going to act graciously as a visitor? Are they going to act within the laws and the rituals and the courtesies of hospitality even when the host isn't visible? So it's almost like this boss fight. When Odysseus and his crew make it to the island, Odysseus has them swear an oath not to kill any of the cattle or the sheep on the island, which belong to Helios. Guess what happens? I will give you 2 guesses. Just kidding, you won't need that many. Odysseus takes a nap because he is exhausted from babysitting his crew. His crew, while he's asleep, are you know what would be a brilliant idea? Go and kill the cattle we were specifically told not to kill. That we specifically made an oath not to kill. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, just to make sure that we're doing this right and we're not taking any unnecessary risks here, let's sacrifice these cattle to the sun god. Which is kind of ironic, because they already belong to the sun god, so why would they need to be sacrificed to the sun god? Just something to ponder there. It still looks like robbery. Yes, they're supposed to make these sacrifices when you kill an animal, but that ritual does not justify the killing of an animal that you were specifically forbidden to kill. Odysseus' crew needs to go and think through what they're doing for a hot second. But then Odysseus wakes up, he looks at his men, the cattle are dead, they are feasting, and he's like, why did you guys do that? So then they leave the island, and Zeus sends a storm after them, and everyone dies except Odysseus. And that takes us back to the beginning of the story where we started in the Odyssey, where Odysseus is trapped on Calypso's island, where he will stay for the next 7 years. So at that point, then you have the Council of the Gods. Athena speaks up for Odysseus. Odysseus is released. He's making his way home. All the stops we've talked about. He's being all political. Telemachus is trying to figure out what's going on with his father. Penelope is navigating a very sticky situation with all her suitors, with all her unwanted suitors living in her home. How awkward would that be? I don't even want to know. So, at that very cheerful point in the story, let's continue to Book 13. And we are officially halfway done with the Odyssey. Let's talk Book 13. So, Odysseus is finally on Ithaca. He landed asleep. He took a long nap. When he woke up, he did not recognize Ithaca because Athena was there, and she was like, okay, so cast a mist. And then he does not recognize Ithaca. So then Athena comes to him in disguise as a shepherd, and she's like, hey, you seem new here, how can I help? And Odysseus, again, not recognizing Athena, spins his tales. I was off with some friends on a ship, and they dumped me here, and they coincidentally left my treasure with me. Now I don't know what to do or where to go, and I don't recognize this place. And Athena's just like, nice try, Odysseus. And she reveals herself as the goddess, and he's like, oh, hi. And Athena is like, well, welcome to Ithaca. You did it. And he's like, I don't think this is Ithaca. So she convinces him this is Ithaca and then lifts the mist. And then she and Odysseus retreat to a cave where they have some strategy sessions because Ithaca has changed while Odysseus is away. I think the biggest thing that interested me in Book 13 is the idea that Odysseus has to learn to see Ithaca with the new eyes. Because, yes, he's come home, but this is not the same Ithaca he left. The political landscape is very different. The cultural landscape is very different. His house is very different. His wife is different. His son is different. It's like everything's changed. And Odysseus needs to be able to approach it with the understanding that, well, yes, this is home. This is also that in practice, this is a new location for him. He isn't familiar with the customs, where he does not know who's in power, who has what sort of influence, etc. And so he needs to be willing to approach Ithaca as an entirely new challenge to be solved. Athena is setting him up for success there with the right mindset. 2 points here. 1, mentors are so important when you are doing life and when life gets hard, because they can see what you can't see. And Odysseus could not see the suitors, he couldn't see the changes when he first landed, but Athena was able to open his eyes up to that and also convince him that this is going to need a little more strategy, a little more skill, than he wants to admit that it will take. Also, the importance of approaching even old problems and old solutions and old patterns with the eyes of like the new experiences that we've had, the new knowledge that we've had. Tradition is all well and good. If we can't approach tradition with eyes that are willing to see not just the beautiful things about tradition, but also the less than ideal things, the messed up things, the complicated things about tradition, then we are setting ourselves up for decline. So in book 14, Odysseus on Ithaca is going around and he visits one of his slaves, who is a swineherder. And they talk. The swineherder complains about the suitors. He laments that Odysseus is absent, probably dead. Odysseus, of course, spins his lies and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm this foreign traveler. I did many mighty deeds in war, but then I was tricked by my crew and abandoned here." Sob story. I love the drama, Odysseus. So they're talking, and Odysseus is trying to convince the swineherder that Odysseus is coming home. But the swineherder is like, no, he's been dead. Don't tell me these tall tales. I don't want to hear any of them. At the beginning of this story, I was interested by the stories that Odysseus spun, and then I was amused, and I'm just annoyed. Like, bruh, let's maybe start telling the truth a little bit, okay? I am very much annoyed with Odysseus at the moment. But we continue. I finished book 15, which was really interesting from like a narrative point of view. Here we have, by contrast, Odysseus's journey and Telemachus's journey. So Athena visits Telemachus and she's like, "Okay, it's time to come home. Come back to Ithaca." And Odysseus is with the swineherder, getting the lay of the political landscape and exchanging stories. Odysseus still weaving his tall tales. There is one quote here. This is from the swineherder. He and Odysseus are sharing their sob stories, which, I mean, yes, they are genuinely tragic stories. The swineherder says, "After many years of agony and absence from one's home, a person can begin enjoying grief." And this reminds me of the song "Somebody That I Used to Know" by Gautier. And there's this line in this song, "You can get addicted to a certain kind of sadness." So it's just cool seeing like these concepts and ideas and these turns of phrases from books that are literally thousands of years old, and then seeing them echoed in modern literature and modern music. Long live the classics. I finished book 16. So what's happening here is that Telemachus and Odysseus disguised meet. Telemachus is telling his tale of woe with the suitors and the loss of his father and all those complications. And Odysseus is like, "Wait a second, what's going on here? Why aren't the people of Ithaca helping you?" And he also says, summarizing here, I'd rather die than watch in shame as my house is pillaged. And Telemachus is like, whoa, I understand where you're coming from, but there are special circumstances here. And then Athena tells Odysseus to reveal himself to his son. And at first Telemachus just thinks it's a trick of the gods, but eventually he is convinced, and they begin planning what they're going to do with the suitors, which obviously is more deception, starting with Odysseus dressing up as an old beggar and infiltrating his former household. Yeah, it is very tactical. I am just getting very impatient with all the deception. Like, come on, guys. Let's just fess up here and get the happy ending, shall we? And like, he's already in Ithaca. He's already revealed himself to his son. What more is there left? Like, it's the slaughter. It's the reunion with Penelope, and we have 8 more books. We are only 2/3 of the way through. So, I do not know what to expect from these books. Lots of death and deception, I am sure. But that's going to be an adventure as we continue. Okay, so your plan essentially is test everyone, trust no one. So while Odysseus is masquerading as a beggar, Telemachus will be playing his role in the household as he has done for the last however many years. And they're going to be figuring out, okay, so Like, which of the servants are loyal? Which of the slaves are loyal? Is Penelope loyal? Although she's had many characters vouch for her time and time again, such as a swineherder and Athena, most notably. All have vouched that Penelope has remained loyal. Also, okay, so the suitors discovered that their plot to kill Telemachus has failed. So if you will remember, when Telemachus first leaves Ithaca, the suitors are like, oh, we're going to kill him when he comes back. Telemachus has returned, and they were laying in wait to ambush him, but Athena protected Telemachus, and he has returned to Ithaca alive. And so the suitors are not very happy about that, and Penelope comes downstairs and she's like, okay guys, you have played your games way too long. Planning to kill my son is out of line. This is horrific. You need to stop doing this. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. Like, yes, girl, preach. It made me so happy to see her come down and start standing up for herself. Even though that is an incredibly risky move. There are dozens and dozens of suitors in her house. I think it's like 130. She doesn't know who she can trust. She does not have a man in the household to rely on. It's a precarious situation, but she's still standing up and taking action, and I am cheering her on for that. Book 17 begins with Telemachus returning to his palace and reporting back to his mother, Penelope, about his journeys abroad and all the information that he learned about his father. However, he does not tell her that Odysseus is in Ithaca at the moment. There's a prophet, not the one that we met in the underworld, but another one that traveled with Telemachus on his way home, who foretells Odysseus' return, and Penelope is cautiously hopeful about it. Throughout this scene, and also in some of the earlier scenes in this book, we see Telemachus continually trying to step up and be the man in the situation. And frequently, it does not go very well. He loses his temper, he gets out of place, he has a lot of bark and no bite. He doesn't have the power or the authority, or he doesn't command the respect to enforce what he's saying. Why is he struggling to step into this of being the man? Now, narratively speaking, one of the major points of the Odyssey is that not just that Odysseus needs to return home, but that his home needs him to return. And if Telemachus is the man of the house, then Odysseus isn't needed, at least in that role. You can still be like, well, he's needed as a husband, he's needed as a father, but he isn't necessary anymore to the running of the household. So there's that whole narrative side of the thing. From other points, I've noticed that Telemachus tends to, first of all, he does not have a lot of confidence in himself or in the gods or in what he's doing, or he just doesn't have a lot of confidence. Something we see with Odysseus and a lot of the more godlike characters such as Athena, Zeus, Poseidon, the Cyclops, Circe, Calypso, they all act very decisively, and Telemachus doesn't. Another thing is that he isn't very skilled. He said so himself, of I don't know how to use weapons, I am not a good politician, I don't know how to give speeches, I don't know how to handle myself in these situations. As he is journeying abroad, we see that as he's in these foreign courts trying to find information, he is managing to do so. Arguably not as effectively as someone else, such as Odysseus, is able to do so, but he's still getting the job done. So I think what he needs there is more practice and also more confidence in his skills. The ironic thing is that you become more confident as you become more skilled, but also, to a degree at least, you become more skilled as you become more confident, and as you begin to trust your abilities and use them to their full extent. So he's in a little bit of a catch-22 there, where what he needs to do is take a leap of faith. Another thing I've noticed is that he doesn't really, obviously speaking, he doesn't have a father. He has his grandfather, who is very old and not physically up to the task. He has a swineherder, who is a slave, just on a sheer storytelling and archetypal level, is not full manhood. In that, as a slave, you do not have free will, you do not have the ability to make your own choices, take your own risks, deal with the full consequences, and you're not at full power, all of which tend to be associated with heroes such as Odysseus, Polites, Menelaus, and the other major masculine actors in the Odyssey. So while he does have some mentor figures in his life, from father figures to now recently Athena, he's still missing his father. The father is one of the most important mentors a young man and a young woman can have, and so he's missing that. That's holding him back from being able to step into his full masculinity. And also we see that as Telemachus and Odysseus have been working together to create a plan to deal with the suitors, that Telemachus is beginning to approach the situation more confidently. And in part that's because now he knows what he's doing, where he's going, but I think also part of it is having his father back in his life. Next up in this story, we had Telemachus reporting back to Penelope, the prophet foretelling Odysseus' return. Odysseus returns to his own palace disguised as a beggar, which there is such a painful irony. In the first time Odysseus stepping back into his own palace after being gone for 20 years is as a beggar. The irony, it hurts, it's beautiful, it's poetic. I'm so excited for him to step back into his role as a king and husband and father here. Yeah, so as a beggar, he and the swineherder who he came to the palace with are abused and jeered at and physically assaulted by the suitors, which is obviously a blatant trespassing of the whole idea of hospitality, which we have seen over and over and over again throughout the Odyssey, frequently being attached to either exceptional benefits or exceptional consequences. So again, that's just more setup for the big climax, grand finale. I'm not sure what to call it. Something else I wanted to point out here is that as Odysseus has taken more and more decisive action, the sea of uncertainty that he's been in has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. There's this really great quote in Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, and I'm going to paraphrase it here. It's that by saying yes to something, you're saying no to everything else. So every choice you make is narrowing your field of possibilities. Which you might be like, oh, that's such a terrible thing, but actually that's kind of a really nice thing, because there are so many possibilities in the world that if you just have every single one of them open at all times, it's going to be really overwhelming to the point of not being able to function and make a decision. So as an example, if you choose to do drugs, and you get addicted, then you're going to be dealing with the consequences of addiction, and that's going to be shutting doors for you. Maybe you won't be able to hold a job. Maybe there will be all these opportunities you're missing out on. There'll be negative consequences of the addiction. And that's a choice leading to doors being shut. On the flip side, you decide to go get a job. Now you are working all those hours of the day. What is it, 7, 8, 9 hours of the day, when you could be doing walking in the park, flying to Italy, playing video games, eating chips in your parents' basement. There's a lot of options here. But you're choosing instead to have a job, which, well, it does close those doors. It also opens a lot of other doors because now you have money. And therefore, you can see that as you make choices, the sea of uncertainty grows smaller and it becomes more precise. It's kind of like your own little personal algorithm. How crazy is that? Book 17 wraps up with the pieces being put in place for Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, to be able to finally sit down and talk with Penelope. And I am looking forward to that conversation. Okay, I just finished book 18. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, wrestles another beggar, Iris, and wins. The suitors are like, oh, congratulations on winning and getting rid of that greedy scumbag. Which is so ironic, considering that they were blaming Iris for being a leech, essentially. And what are they doing? Being a plethora of leeches. So a little self-awareness is my prescription for these guys. And then Odysseus is like, well, guess what? Y'all aren't going to have a very good day when Odysseus comes home. And then Penelope comes out dressed all fancy. And she's like, okay, guys, it's time for me to get married again. So if you want to court me, you need to court me right. I want gifts. And Odysseus is like, oh, that's my wife, scamming them all. And he's so proud of her. First of all, the suitors need some self-awareness. Second of all, it's interesting to see Telemachus grow up more and more as we're progressing through these later books where he's working with Odysseus, where, like in book 18, he commanded the suitors with confidence, and the suitors actually obeyed what he said because they recognized that confidence in him. So that's been really cool to see, and I am looking forward to that character growth continuing. I'm also really looking forward to seeing more of Penelope because I do like her a lot. I finished book 19 last night. Now let's talk about it. So in this book, we have Telemachus is locking up all the weapons. Anything left lying around the palace, he's locking it up in preparation for when they get rid of the suitors. And then we have Penelope coming down for her private talk with Odysseus, who is still disguised as a beggar. And at this point, I was kind of just screaming at Odysseus, like, come on, tell her. But no, he spins his deceptions. And he's like, oh, and by the way, I hear your husband is alive, and he might be coming soon. And she's like, oh, that would be amazing. But I don't dare hope that's true. Like, sir, this is your wife. Please, she's been waiting for 20 years. Please just tell her that you are alive. Like, why do you need to keep spinning these lies? I don't know. Okay, so one thing that really stuck out to me with how Penelope was described in this book is that she was frequently described as cautious, or wary, or careful, or thoughtful. And it's interesting to see here how her caution it's helped her navigate life without her husband, it's helped her survive with all the suitors, but now it's making it hard for her to accept the possibility that Odysseus might be on his way home, which is both a good and a bad thing. A lot of character traits, they're like a coin where they have a head side and a tail side. So, for example, courage can be a very good trait in that it enables us to move forward despite fear. But on the flip side, maybe we jump into things a little too fast and we don't take stock of what are the risks, what are the challenges, what are we going to come up against, what do we need to be careful of. And so it's interesting to see Penelope here of how caution has helped her survive this far, but moving forward, caution isn't going to necessarily be the most helpful thing for her. Odysseus is recognized by his old governess. At first, he's spinning his tails for her too, and then she's like, oh, I recognize that scar. And he's like, okay, yes, I am Odysseus, but keep this quiet. Back to the conversation between Odysseus, still disguised, and Penelope is asking him for advice. Like, should I stay in this house? Should I get married? I had this dream that an eagle is going to come and destroy my geese. And Odysseus is like, oh, yes, that dream, let me interpret it for you. Odysseus is going to come back and he will kill all the suitors, and then you will live happily ever after. And so Penelope decides to set up her axe and bow challenge, which the idea behind this is that one of the tricks that Odysseus was famous for is being able to shoot an arrow through 12 axes. And Penelope is going to ask her suitors to complete the same challenge in order to win her hand. So, book 20. Odysseus is sleeping, and Odysseus is trying to sleep, and he's just like tossing and turning. He's worried about how things are going to play out and if everything's going to be alright in the end. And Athena comes to him and she's like, why worry? You have me on your side. I'm awesome. Everything's going to be okay. So then we have this next day. It's a festival day, and Odysseus is still disguised, is chatting with the servants who are bringing in the livestock for the feast. And meanwhile, the suitors are planning once more to kill Telemachus, but then they see an eagle swooping past, and they were like, maybe that's a sign. Let's put this plan on hold for now. And so then at the feast, we have a prophet comes in, and he tells the suitors that they are doomed and that Odysseus is coming back, and they're like, ha 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 ha, get out. Prophet leaves, and then we have Odysseus is watching the suitors, Telemachus is watching the suitors, Penelope is watching the suitors, and they're all just like watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Yeah, I think that something that's super easy to forget is that it's not enough to just have the right plan, you also have to have the right timing. And like there's a time to act and there's a time to wait. And there's been all this action leading up to this of like, okay, we need to talk to these people, we need to hide the weapons, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to have this conversation. And now it's like, okay, everything's in place, and it's the calm before the storm. It's the waiting to strike. And I think that's another thing that makes Odysseus so capable, is that he knows when to act and he knows when to wait. And so let's move on to book 21. Okay, guys, I love Penelope so much. In 21, we have still during the feast, Penelope decides now is the time to do the challenge with the axes and the bow. So she brings out all the supplies and Telemachus helps her set it up, and then he tries his father's famous party trick and he fails. And then while the suitors are lining up to take their turns with the bow, Odysseus pulls aside the swineherder and the cowherder. He's like, I'm Odysseus. And then they're like, oh, yay! And there's like this beautiful reunion. And he's like, okay, here's what I need you guys to do. We are going to make sure that the women go upstairs and we'll lock the doors there and keep them upstairs. And then we will lock the doors to the palace so no one can get outside. And they're like, okay, yes, sir, we're on this. Okay, so then go back to the feast where the suitors are all trying their hands at the bow. Can't even string the bow. And so at last, they're like, okay, yes, we failed, but let's make a sacrifice to Apollo, who is the god of archers, among many other things. And then we'll try again tomorrow. And so Odysseus, in disguise again, he's like, wait, can I try? And the suitor's like, no! And Penelope's like, yes. And the suitors are like, well, no, that would be so awkward if he could do it, but we couldn't. That would just be humiliating. And Penelope is like, well, you don't have to worry about that. You've already lost your dignity by trespassing the hospitality and staying in my house for 3-4 years and destroying my wealth and my household. And it's like, oh, yes, girl, you preach. It made me so happy. And it was so funny. Like, I literally laughed out loud at that part. And then, of course, Odysseus strings the bow, and he successfully completes the challenge. It is his trick, after all. The women are locked upstairs, and then the doors to the house are locked so no one can get out. And so now we are poised at the beginning of book 22 with what is probably going to be the final battle. Okay, book 22. In sum, everyone dies. Almost everyone. Odysseus reveals himself to the suitors. They petition for mercy. He gives none. He ends not just the suitors, but those among his servants who were friendly or cooperated with the suitors. So, yeah, no mercy here whatsoever. At one point, Odysseus is called Lord of Suffering by the narrative, which I think was really interesting. It reminds me of Menelaus much earlier in the story when Telemachus goes to visit him, and Menelaus basically says, we survived because of hospitality. Now we are required to extend hospitality. I wonder if there's like a parallel here of Odysseus. He survived through and because and in spite of suffering. And now, I don't know if he's required, but in balance, he now extends that suffering. Something like that. I'm still working through that thought in my mind. Another thing here is that Athena is fighting with Odysseus and Telemachus in this battle to a degree, but even though she's a god, she is not giving them an easy victory. She's making them work for it, and she's testing their courage and their commitment over and over and over again throughout this battle. So, yeah, and then book 22 ends with trying to clean up things a little bit. So, yeah, all hail the good Lord Odysseus, I guess. In book 20, Penelope is informed by Odysseus's old governess that Odysseus has returned, and she's very cautious in accepting his return. And she's arguing with the governess, like, no, he couldn't possibly have come back. You're just spinning tales to torment me. The governess is like, no, 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 it's really him. And so finally, Penelope comes downstairs, and she sees Odysseus, and she's like, okay, that might be him, but she still isn't entirely sure. And it read to me very much like she wants to believe, but she doesn't dare believe. Which I think was so well done. Just, like all the emotions in that book. It was just so, it was phenomenal. So good. And Telemachus is like, hello, this is your husband. Why aren't you jumping for joy here? And Odysseus is like, she's right to be wary. I've been gone for 20 years. I've changed a lot. She's justified in her wariness. And it also read to me very much like he was a little bit proud of Penelope's caution. The more I'm reading this, the more I'm appreciating how much Odysseus and Penelope are on the same wavelength. Like, they're both very similar in their cleverness, and I think their wariness, and I think they take a lot of pride in each other, which is cool to see. And then Penelope is like, okay, you're probably my husband. We'll make up your old bed for you that's outside of my room. And Odysseus is like, whoa, 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 wait a second. I made that bed. It's not exactly movable. How did it get outside of my room? And then Penelope is like, okay, it really is you, because only you and me knew about that. And then there's this beautiful reunion, and I literally started crying. It was so good. I'm so happy. Still upset with how much deception there was, especially after Odysseus got home, and disturbed by like his lack of mercy and how he dealt with his household. One thing I noticed in between seeing the household from Telemachus' point of view versus seeing the household from Odysseus' point of view is that in Odysseus' mind, this is all very black and white. It's like, either you were loyal to me for the entire 20 years, or you weren't. There's like no in between. There's no room for negotiating difficult circumstances. And the way that he purchased his household is very, very reflective of it. Either you were 100% loyal to me the entire time, or you weren't, and there are consequences to that. But Telemachus approaches things very differently. I feel like he still could have been a little bit more merciful in how he handled some of the situations, but I think because he lived through this, he's aware of how difficult it actually was, and of the negotiation that was required to survive with the suitors, but still remain loyal. And so Telemachus is willing to look on things with more mercy and deal with a lot more nuance than his father is willing to. One of the things that Emily Wilson talked about in her introduction is how Penelope is consistently portrayed as being mysterious. Her motivations are unclear. You can't be entirely sure what she wants through most of the narrative. Like the reasons behind, for example, why she sets up the challenge with the bow and the axes. And Emily was a little bit frustrated about that, of like, why can't we understand what's in her mind? She's always going to be a mystery to the reader. But I think, as I was reading this, I think that's actually so beautiful. Of Penelope, she lost her husband, to a degree she lost her son, and like what should have been her best years with her son. She had dozens of suitors living in her house, taking her wealth, running her household for the last 3-4 years. And yeah, it's like everything in her life is public property to a degree, except for her own motivations and her own mind. And that one thing that she has is irrevocably private. And I love that, of how like she's been trespassed, she's been slighted, she's been crossed by like most of the people in the narrative. But that one thing is so sacred, so personal, so woven into her, so completely her own, that it is protected from everyone, even us readers. Like, I understand how that could be frustrating to read, but also I think it's very beautiful. It's very merciful for that to be so completely Penelope's that it's not even shared with us as readers. So we have reached the end. So in book 24, we have Hermes escorting the spirits of the suitors to the underworld, where they speak briefly with the spirits of Agamemnon and Achilles. And then we have the townspeople who realize their sons are dead, and they are getting very angry, and they go up to confront Odysseus, who comes out armed with a few of his friends, and they start fighting, and then Athena's like, whoa, 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 stop. And she makes everyone swear an oath of peace. The end. That was it felt like a very abrupt ending, but I wonder if that's part of the point of the Odyssey, is that in life there's never a clear ending and a clear beginning. Everything just kind of fades into each other. We have finished the Odyssey. Congratulations. And thank you for sticking around this long. I just have a handful of thoughts, quick points that I want to make in just like overall things I got out of this. And then we'll talk about some favorites, least favorites, and would I read this again. The first thing is the importance of bravery. We see time and time again it's emphasized that cowardice is a vice and that courage is a virtue. And that it's courage that enables action, and it's courage that enables justice, it enables exploration, it enables forward progress. That was really cool to see through this story. Another thing is the idea of the sea of suffering. That is the sea of suffering that makes us or breaks us. And then we have all these ethical dilemmas that are presented through the sea of suffering. When is it justified to repay suffering with suffering? When are you called to take that suffering and then give grace? Some very interesting things to think on, and I don't have all the answers, and I won't even try to know all the answers, but I think it's very interesting that some of the final words in the Odyssey is saying, guys, maybe it's time to put a stop to this suffering and just live and let live and let the past be the past, and now we need to move on and we need to focus on the future and rebuilding that and figure out how to negotiate a peace with each other. Because ultimately, living by a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye, I guess it's a crude form of justice, but it's not a very practical form of justice. So yeah, that was lots to think on, and I definitely enjoyed the imagery there, but also the way that was explored throughout the story. Something else that I've been thinking about a lot recently, not just with reading the Odyssey, is the way that modern novels, they're organized along plot beats. So you need this emotional point here, you need this emotional point there. It's very rhythmical, and it's very fictional, shall we say. And reading the Odyssey was a very refreshing break from that. So just as two big examples here, in the Odyssey, it's full of very complicated people presented with very complicated choices. And reading through the Odyssey, there were very few points when I was like, oh yes, this character is a hero. Like with Odysseus, who is, he's the title character. It's like, well, yes, we're cheering for him to get home, but at the same time, he's with the way he handles the suitors, the way he handles Calypso, the way he handles Circe, that is not who I want to see as a hero. And so it's very easy, I think, to get caught up in this fictional world where there are clean-cut good guys and there are clean-cut bad guys. Then, of course, you can get into the anti-hero, the morally gray character, etc., etc. But by and large, it's very comfortable to read a book or to go into the world and just see everything clear-cut. Oh yeah, this person is a good guy, this person is a bad guy. Everything's simple. But the world is not that simple, and people are not that simple. I think the Odyssey invites us to take a step back and inspect the world through the lens of complicated people with complicated choices. And then I think, one, to acknowledge the complexity, but then two, still try to find the moral road through all of that. There are right choices to make and there are wrong choices to make in the Odyssey, the most notable example being hospitality. Like, there's a right way to do hospitality, there's a wrong way to do hospitality. There's a right way to do war, there's a wrong way to do war. And even, which is definitely one I had to wrestle with through the story, there's a right way to do deception and there's a wrong way to do deception. So even through the very unabashed complexity that the Odyssey presents to us, the story also presents to us a world where there is still right choices and wrong choices, even if their moral code doesn't necessarily make sense to us or line up with what we would consider to be moral actions. Yeah, and then also this idea of endings and beginnings. And I feel like in a lot of modern novels, there's a very obvious beginning and a very obvious end to the story. But I did not feel like that was true with the Odyssey. For about the first 2/3 of the story, you have Odysseus trying to reach Ithaca. And then the last third of the story is Odysseus in Ithaca, which you would think would be the end of the story in a clean cut. Like if Homer published this in 2024, 2025, he would land on Ithaca, he meets Penelope, he has a final battle, it's over, okay? But instead, the last third of the book is Odysseus navigating life on Ithaca as he tries to recalibrate and figure out what's going on here. Who's loyal, who's not loyal, how do I handle this situation? And then even still with the ending, it doesn't feel like a very clear-cut ending. Like, yes, he meet up with Penelope, yes, he's back with Telemachus, yes, he purged his household, yes, he's back home, and yet there's this note of uncertainty. Like, the story might be finished, but life goes on. And then even at the beginning of, chronologically, the beginning of the Odyssey with Odysseus and his men leaving Troy, how much of a beginning is that? Odysseus was gone from home for 20 years. The Odyssey only covers the last 10 years of his trip. So what happened in the first 10 years? And obviously that's the story of the Iliad. But I'm just pointing out that the Odyssey doesn't necessarily have a clean-cut beginning for Odysseus. Life is like that, in that we don't have clean-cut beginnings and we don't have clean-cut endings. Life just keeps going. And I think that while that's very abrupt for a story to begin and end that way, it is very much more lifelike, and I appreciated the honesty in that there wasn't a defined end or a defined beginning to Odysseus' story. So yes, with that in mind, let's talk favorites, least favorites, and would I do this again? Okay, my least favorite character. This is an excellent question. There were a lot of people I deeply disliked. It would probably be Antinius. He is the chief suitor. Yeah, I really disliked him. That being said, I feel like I disliked everyone in this book to a certain degree. Favorite character? By far Penelope. I love her so much. Second favorite would be Telemachus. And third favorite, probably Athena. Now, you might be asking, where did Odysseus score here? I don't hate him, but I do not like him. I admire his cunning and his dedication and his decisiveness. But boy, I have some notes for his methodology. Yeah, I would say he falls somewhere in the middle for me of favorite versus least favorite characters. So, yeah. Okay. My favorite book was definitely 23, which is the one where you see Penelope wrestling with, is Odysseus my husband? Is he not? Is he in disguise? Is this a trick of the gods? My least favorite book would be book 8. That's the one where he's doing the games with Nausicaa's family, okay? In that whole saga. Just because it felt, I don't know, I struggled to follow some of the plot there, and also, like, logistically speaking, it was a very relevant story in that it set up a lot for everything that followed. But at the same time, it was just like, I did not care what was happening. Would I recommend The Odyssey? Yes, I would. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Would I read this again? I don't know if I would read the Emily Wilson translation again. Maybe. I did enjoy it. Just with the whole, like, more modern language. Yeah, I didn't like that as much. So Like, yes, I will be rereading the Odyssey, but probably with a different translation. If you are not super familiar with classics, if you aren't very comfortable with the more formal English, then the Emily Wilson translation is a great place to start. It's very approachable. I think Emily Wilson does a fantastic job. Yeah, so I liked it. I would definitely recommend it. And thank you for joining me for this read along for the Odyssey. If you have finished this video, which I think it's about 4 hours of raw footage by now. I have no idea how this is going to edit down to. But if you're finished this, please like, share, comment, subscribe, all the fun stuff, and I will see you next time. And the text made a really interesting point. I swear. Interesting is going to be so overused by the end of this video. I think I'm going to be physically incapable of saying the word without cringing for at least the rest of this year. But we continue. Are discussing with the gods about whether or not words. Okay, I finished book 6. So what's happening here is that Odysseus, he has washed up on. I literally just looked at Python. Phaeacia. Okay. Phaeacia. Okay. Phaeacia. Okay. I am struggling with the pronunciation of all of these Greek names. Okay. Phaeacia.